Good afternoon. This is James Exum coming to you from my studio in South Austin, Texas. I'm about to record for you, or I am recording for you, a new video. This one is on the subject of obedient domestication. That sounds a bit complex, doesn't it? Obedient domestication. And when you hear a phrase like that, you may think, well, it's on how to train your puppy dog to be good and not to do his business indoors, or it might have to do with taking care of cattle in the field and teaching them not to stray, or sheep to do the same thing. Sheep is a very good example. But in this case, it's talking about human beings, and the yogic philosophy intertwined with the concept of human beings being domesticated under the parlance of obediency. And why would you do that? Well, you would do that so that they know there's certain rules of the law, rules of religion, rules of moral standing, and so forth that they shall not do. And why would you do that? Well, it gives you, in the religious sense, it gives you a form of control over those folks. If they are not taught religious obedience, thou shalt not, so to speak, thou shalt and thou shalt not, then you have a person that's just a regular human that doesn't know the laws of the Lord, quote unquote, anymore than a squirrel sitting on my patio would. But I'm not going to get into that at this point. I'm simply giving you an introduction. So I'll just let the text of the discourse I wrote earlier today speak for itself, and perhaps with a little diligence and a little close attention, you'll get the point I'm trying to make here. So let's switch now over to the video. The reason I'm doing this, and the reason I'm not following my previous way of speaking to you in the past by reading it myself or working from bullet points myself, is because my Parkinson's is advancing and it's causing my vocal cords not to speak as loud as they should, or with resonance as they did in the past. And also, after speaking for a few minutes, I need a drink of water or liquid, and I also need to cough occasionally. So I think it's best to let the narrator of my word program on my computer speak for me. And here we go.
The usage of guilt to domesticate the soul. James H. Exum / Sakshi. Austin, Texas. Copyrighted August 4th, 2026. All rights reserved. The entrance for guilt is at the threshold of the inner house. Sakshi. This is a discourse in the cadence of the witness, in conversation with Vedic wisdom and the great yogic sages. So seekers, sit quietly and look within. Before the soul is free, the mind builds a courtyard around it. Before the bird remembers the sky, the hand of habit teaches it the smallness of the cage. And among the tools by which the restless mind attempts to govern the radiant self, guilt is one of the most subtle. It does not always arrive as enemy. Sometimes it comes clothed as conscience, as reverence, as obedience, as moral discipline. Sometimes it whispers, "You have strayed, return." But sometimes it tightens its cord and says, "You are unworthy to return." In that moment, guilt ceases to be a lamp and becomes a leash. To domesticate the soul by guilt is to train the infinite to bow before the finite, to make the child of immortality behave like a frightened servant of memory. The soul, in the language of the Upanishadic seers, is not a trembling thing. It is Atman, subtle, luminous, unburned by fire, unwetted by water, untouched by the stain that the mind imagines. Yet the embodied mind, woven of impressions, desires, fears, and inherited doctrines, often mistakes the turbulence of regret for the voice of truth. Thus the seeker must learn discrimination, what in guilt purifies, and what in guilt imprisons. The Vedic measure, dharma, karma, and the moral order. The Vedic vision does not begin with guilt. It begins with order, RTA, the cosmic harmony, dharma, the sustaining law, karma, the seed and fruit of action. In this view, a wrong action is not merely an offense against social approval. It is a misalignment with reality. Like a note sung out of tune in a sacred chant, it asks not for self-hatred, but for correction. The ancient ritual world of the Vedas sought restoration. Fire, offering, mantra, resolve. Later, the Upanishadic sages turned the altar inward and asked, who is the doer? Who is the witness? Who is bound? Here is the great difference. Dharma disciplines action, but guilt often tries to define identity. Dharma says, act rightly. Guilt, when corrupted by fear, says, you are wrong. Karma says, every seed bears fruit, plant wisely. Guilt says, you are only the harvest of your past. The sages do not deny consequence, they deny confusion. The deed is to be seen clearly, repaired where possible, relinquished inwardly, and transformed into wisdom. But the self is not to be reduced to the deed. Sakshi, the witness beyond the lash. The yogi Sakshi, the witness consciousness, stands apart from the storm of accusation. It observes thought, memory, remorse, pride, fear, and longing without becoming any of them. This is not coldness. This is purity of seeing. When guilt arises, the witness does not immediately obey it, nor does it violently suppress it. The witness asks, is this guilt the fragrance of awakened conscience, or the smoke of conditioning? Is it guiding me toward compassion, truth, and repair, or is it shrinking my spirit into obedience and shame? Many religious histories show this double face of guilt. In temples, monasteries, ashrams, churches, and courts of spiritual authority, guilt has sometimes served as a guardian of ethical life. It has reminded communities that action matters, that cruelty has weight, that desire without discernment can wound the world. Yet the same force has also been used to domesticate souls, to make the seeker dependent upon an institution, a priesthood, a teacher, or a doctrine that claims monopoly over forgiveness. When guilt is made into merchandise, liberation is delayed. When remorse is converted into dependence, the sacred becomes a chain. The sages and the art of inner correction. Patanjali speaks not in the language of condemnation, but of purification. Yoga is the stilling of the movements of the mind. The afflictions, ignorance, egoism, attachment, aversion, and clinging to life, are to be studied and attenuated. There is no command to hate oneself. There is abhyasa, steady practice, and vairagya, dispassion. The yogi does not whip the mind into holiness. The yogi observes, disciplines, and frees it. Krishna, speaking to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, does not domesticate the warrior through guilt. He awakens him through discernment. Arjuna is not told, "You are sinful because you tremble." He is taught to see rightly. The nature of the self, the obligation of dharma, the bondage of attachment, the freedom of offering action without possessiveness. Krishna does not make Arjuna small. He makes him capable. Vasistha, instructing Rama, turns the prince toward inquiry. The mind alone, says the yogic wisdom of that tradition, becomes the cause of bondage and liberation. If guilt clouds the mind, bondage deepens. If guilt is seen, understood, and dissolved into wisdom, it becomes a doorway. The error remains a teacher, but it is no longer a tyrant. Guilt, shame, and the domesticated soul. Guilt says, "I have done something that requires attention." Shame says, "I am the thing that must be hidden." The first may become medicine. The second often becomes poison. A soul domesticated by shame learns to approach the divine with lowered eyes, not from humility, but from fear. It confuses reverence with self-erasure. It believes holiness is achieved by shrinking. But the great yogic sages do not ask the seeker to become less alive. They ask the seeker to become less false. True humility is not self-hatred. It is accurate seeing. It is the willingness to bow to truth without inventing a false identity of corruption. The river does not despise itself because mud has entered it. It flows, settles, clarifies, and continues toward the sea. Likewise, the seeker must confess what must be confessed, repair what can be repaired, accept consequence where consequence is just, and then turn inward to the witness that was never stained. Religious history, from moral awakening to spiritual control. Across traditions, guilt has often appeared at the border between ethics and power. In its noble form, it awakens responsibility. It tells the human being, your actions ripple through the family, the village, the earth, the subtle worlds. Violence, deception, selfishness, and neglect are not without consequence. In this way, guilt can serve Dharma by interrupting unconscious action. Historical extremes, when authority weaponized the wounded conscience. The history of organized religion gives grave examples of what happens when guilt is no longer treated as an inward summons to truth, but as a mechanism of public obedience. The Inquisition, in its medieval, Spanish, Portuguese, and Roman forms, shows how the fear of heresy could be joined to state power, judicial procedure, interrogation, secrecy, confiscation, imprisonment, and public punishment. What began as a claim to guard orthodoxy became, in many places, an architecture of control. The soul was called to repentance, but the body was surrounded by courts. The conscience was summoned, but the confession was often demanded beneath threat. Consider the Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478 under Ferdinand and Isabella and not formally abolished until the 19th century. Its stated purpose was to combat heresy and preserve Catholic orthodoxy. Yet it also consolidated royal authority and enforced religious uniformity across a plural society of Christians, Jews, Muslims, Conversos, and Moriscos. In such a theater, guilt was not merely spiritual regret, it became political evidence. The trembling of conscience could be examined, recorded, judged, and displayed. Public acts of penance and punishment taught the community to fear deviation not only as sin, but as social and civic danger. The trial of Galileo before the Roman Inquisition reveals another face of the same machinery. Galileo was not burned or tortured, but he was compelled to answer to ecclesiastical authority for defending heliocentrism, admonished not to hold or defend the Copernican view, tried in 1633, and sentenced to imprisonment later commuted to house arrest. Here, the domestication was intellectual as well as spiritual. The eye had looked through the telescope, but authority demanded that sight bow before approved interpretation. The question was not only, what is true, but who is permitted to say what is true? So also in episodes of censorship, forced recantation, trials for heresy, and the burning of books or bodies, we see the outer dramatization of an inner bondage. Confession can be sacred when it is voluntary truth before the divine. It becomes domination when extracted to prove submission. Repentance can cleanse the heart when it rises from awakened discrimination. It becomes domestication when authority requires the soul to distrust its own direct seeing. The yogic sage would say, no institution can liberate the one whom it first trains to fear the witness within. This is not to deny that societies wrestle with error, disorder, and destructive belief. Dharma itself acknowledges that action must be guided, speech disciplined, and harm restrained. But the Vedic and yogic measure asks whether correction restores alignment or merely produces obedience. When authority uses guilt to make the seeker small, it does not create holiness, it manufactures compliance. When it invites the seeker into truth, responsibility, and self-knowledge, it serves liberation. The difference is immense. One bends the neck, the other opens the eye. But when religious systems learn to cultivate guilt as a permanent atmosphere, the soul becomes domesticated. The seeker no longer asks, what is true? But how may I avoid punishment? No longer, how may I realize the self? But how may I be approved? This is spiritual childhood prolonged by fear. It is useful to those who wish to manage human behavior, but it cannot produce liberation. Moksha is not awarded to the obedient mask. It flowers when ignorance is burned away. The Vedic antidote, remember the self. The antidote is not moral carelessness. The antidote is remembrance. Remember the self, then act with greater responsibility, not less. Remember the witness, then see the movement of guilt without becoming its captive. Remember Dharma, then repair the field of action. Remember karma, then understand that every act is a seed. Remember compassion, then do not turn the knife of regret endlessly against your own heart.
There we have it. Again, this one was a bit long, and I'm not.
The great sages point to a discipline
I'm
more
sorry.
difficult than guilt,
I thought
awareness.
we were finished.
Guilt can be imposed from outside, but awareness must awaken within. Guilt can make a person conform, but awareness makes a person conscious. Guilt can domesticate the soul into social usefulness, but awareness liberates the soul into divine responsibility. The liberated one is not lawless. The liberated one is inwardly aligned. Such a being does not need the whip of shame to avoid harm, for compassion has become natural. Closing invocation. Therefore, O seeker, do not throw away guilt too quickly, and do not worship it too long. Let it speak, but do not let it rule. Let it reveal the crookedness of action, but do not let it define the nature of the self. Offer the mistaken deed into the inner fire. Offer the pride that defends it. Offer the shame that clings to it. Offer even the identity of the one who has fallen. Then sit as Sakshi, the witness, radiant and unbound. From that seat, rise and act again, more gently, more truthfully, more awake.
And there we have it. I'm so sorry. Well, you will forgive the memory of an older man, about to be 76 here in a month or so, a little over a month, about 2 months. Um, it's an interesting subject, and it's something you might want to rewind the video to listen to the various parts of it. I apologize for all of the movements that the video shows of me sitting in this chair during the reading of that. I also apologize for anything else that may have gone wrong during the videotaping. But again, I have no one in my studio helping me with this. I set up the camera, I write the discourse, I select the device settings. I do everything myself, and so, and I'm not trained at this. It's the old saying, you learn as you go, or flying by the seat of your pants. Most of my videos are not this sporadic or this filled with problems, but my ineptitude is not the subject of this video. The words that were spoken by that reader, that narrator, is the subject of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, regardless of all the flaws, and I'll try to do better in the next one. So come back and see me, and in the interim, in the meanwhile, be good to yourself, be good to others, and be good to strangers. And who knows, maybe in a shorter time than we think, all of the problems that we're dealing with domestically here in the United States may pass and go into the annals of history. Thank you again, and goodbye.